Hello, this is Don Victor, author of Drawn to Win, host of the podcast Drawn to Win, the director of the Academy of Composition, and the creator of the Core 80 Experience, also known as the See and Grow Rich in Art video course, which you can find out more information at core80.com. This is the Drawn to Win podcast, where I have the incredible privilege to draw artists from around the world into fun and meaningful conversations around art and life, and yes, maybe even a little food. You can hear us each week on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So make sure you subscribe so you always have a seat among friends. Let's get into the show. Welcome to the show, Dorian.
Well, thanks, Victor. It's good to be here.
I've been kind of looking forward to this conversation. Donna was telling me about you. I guess you did a workshop in New Jersey a week or two ago.
Yeah, actually, I did a demo, and that's where I met her. And obviously, you know Donna, so she's pretty active on social media. But I'm happy to talk to you because we've both studied with Myron at some point in the past, and so I became aware of you, I don't know, a couple of months ago when you were, somehow we crossed paths online. Surprise, surprise. Like everybody crossed paths online. But so here we are talking. So great.
Yeah, awesome. She said that you studied with Myron. Or she always mispronounces his name. Is kind of funny. But when did you study with him?
Oh golly, I studied with Myron. Oh man, it's got to be like 25 years ago.
Oh,
maybe
wow.
even more. Maybe it's even like 30 years ago. I mean,
were you like a teenager?
Excuse me?
Were you like a teenager?
Well, I'm 50 now, and
okay.
I was probably about 20 or 21, somewhere around there. I was just starting my I was already into my illustration career, and one of the amazing things is that I had just finished my schooling in New York at SVA, School of Visual Arts, and studied with a lot of really good teachers, and really felt that I had a grasp on things. And when I met Myron, he introduced me to all the concepts that you're really heavily into with the golden section and design and dividing up the rectangle and the dominant horizontal and vertical and diagonal and all these issues that I had never even really been exposed to. So that was such an eye-opener. Great guy. And his let's just say his forceful approach really made an impression on me, and I learned a lot from him. So there we have it.
Give me 1 second. My mic was giving me an issue. I was trying to fix it. His forceful approach. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
So my father and I disagreed on that approach, and he's one that my father would say, "Oh, there are no absolutes," and of course, Myron is
he is
very
absolute.
forceful, very forceful in his opinion, and I actually felt that I like that very much because I don't like the kind of soft approach to teaching where it's a little mealy mouth and it's not, you just don't know where you stand. At least with somebody who's got a forceful opinion, you can take it or leave it, but you know where they stand, and you know where you stand in relationship to those opinions and and what they're trying to deliver. So those kind of people like Myron and other teachers that really drew a hard line in the sand about what it is they were trying to get across and what it is they believed as a value. as an absolute value, really resonated the most with me. It offered a bit of clarity that I found very, very helpful, and I continue to find very helpful in any relationship. So you just know where you stand.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I think every teacher that I had or every great experience with an authority figure was one who they were the god of the room, right?
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
like they were the authority and they spoke with power. Their being was of power. Um, and it was great because they became a boundary in which you could then be free, but you knew where the boundaries were, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's like raising a child. If the child doesn't know where the boundaries are, then they're actually timid and scared because they don't know if they do this or do that, if they're going to be quote unquote in trouble, right? Um, or where they can really be free in. And
Sure.
so it's interesting. I always found Myron to be, yes, intimidating at some level because, it's just young man, young sir, like that voice. And it's like, ah. But over the years, I just found him to be one of the funniest people I have ever met. And one of the most generous people. Like I it was insane how generous he was. And but at the same time very self-aware, like, um but it was weird because I knew people who studied with him for 30 years and they still were nervous and intimidated by him. And
Hmm.
I'm like, oh, I don't get it. What are you talking about? Like, this guy is like, he's just too cool.
That's interesting. See, I think that I like how you express that being like having a teacher, or that let me see, the most influential teachers in your life have been those that have been like the God in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably like a good way of expressing it, because I think there's a very, I mean, and this is what I think in a sense, is that there, or I've always thought, is that there's a very natural tendency for Americans
Mm-hmm.
um, to assume that I mean, because it's the environment that we grow up in, that there's a cross pollination of ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's that a certain amount of um, freedom for choosing what it is that makes the most sense to you
Mm-hmm.
is the soil that we've grown up in, and so that it's completely fine to be in a room with somebody who's very demonstrative in their beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
because we come from an environment that says, well, take it or leave it, and so when you hear something put forth by somebody who's very, very clear, there's always that pillar that we can rest on, that says, well, that's their opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and from that you help to build your own sense of identity and as an individual,
Mm-hmm.
and I like that. So I was never intimidated by him, and it's always kind of a mystery to me when people uh, uh, say that they were intimidated by him or by anybody who's
Yeah.
forceful. I think well, I don't want to say negatives, anything
Well,
negative
a lot of times, what I found with a couple things, like, especially with male authority figures like that, for young men, early 20s. I mean, I met Myron when I was 17, right? I mean, I'll tell you my first experience with Myron. I'm on the phone with him, and he says, so what are you interested in? I said, well, I want to grow up and be a comic book artist. I want to draw comics, right? And he's like, who are your favorite comic book artists? What comic books have you read? What books have you read on it, right? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I just like the pictures, right? and,
huh, huh.
and and so I thought, okay, well, I guess maybe it's not comics. Maybe it's just a figure. I said, yeah, so yeah, it's really the figure. I love the figure, drawing the figure. who's your favorite figure drawing artist? What books have you read on figure? And what have you studied on the figure? And he's drilling me. And I'm like getting crushed. And I'm like, no, I don't know. It's like, that's what I thought. Typical teenager, only interested in nipples and pubic hair. And I'm like, what? It was the most like crazy moment. Probably, it was insane. And he basically came into my glass world in one conversation through not rocks, but like cinder blocks through my windows, right? And crushed it. But what was the beautiful thing was Myron always said, I will never, he always said, you only grow through trauma. And that's one reason why he was so, because he tried to inflict a trauma, which then gave you a moment to actually expand and grow. It's like building muscle, right? You don't build strength until you rip the muscle. But he always said, I will never cut you, in a sense, if I can't heal you, right? So he'd always have the answer, but he had to create that moment first. And he'd go into these things about these African tribes that would train their people through trauma and things. It was kind of funny, but I like when I was in high school, I actually the best grade I got was in biology because I had a teacher who was very much like Myron, and he was so in control of his classroom, and he had things so systemized. Like the way he would grade, he gave everybody numbers, and then he would post all your grades. So no one knew who the people were. They just knew this number was the top scorer in the class, right? And so by taking away the identity, but at the same time posting the grades publicly, you were safe, but at the same time you were also being exposed, right? And it created this amazing environment of competition. And my one friend whose father graduated from MIT, he was a science nerd. His brother was a science nerd. His grandfather was from Germany in the U.S., came and broke him out of prison and basically brought him to the United States to be a scientist for the government. His uncle is so he comes from this huge science family. I don't. I draw pictures, and we were neck to neck, like we were the top two students in that class because that teacher created an environment that I thrived in. Like if we did tests, before we would do tests, we had to go get these blocks and put these big cardboard things between each of us so that no one would cheat. So like if you were going to look on someone else's paper, you'd have to make a really exaggerated movement to look behind these cardboard box things, right? And the creativity and the systemization and the thinking through of all of these nuances, I fell in love with that man's brilliance. Same exact thing with Myron. All of the systems that he created, I could thrive in because my respect for him was so high that he thought through all these things and then created systems that allowed us to be magical almost, right? So to have that authority, to have that sense of visual power, to have that control over your environment, and to do it not, and both those teachers, they did not do it to say, I'm better than you. They did it to actually enable us to freaking be awesome. And it was done for our benefit. And Myron was an amazing experience. And, it's sad that he's gone now. And,
well, that's life. It's lucky that we got to
experience him.
That's right. That's right.
Did you ever go back?
I'm sorry. What's that?
Did you ever go back and study?
I could kick myself. I went. I studied with him for. I'm sure it wasn't as long as you did. I studied with him for about 10. And
I'm sorry, how long?
For about 10 weeks.
Okay.
And this will make you laugh, but I for 8 of those 10 weeks, and I'm a very diligent student, uh, I was so lost. I had no like grounding whatsoever as to what he was talking about. And then somewhere around the 8th week, it all
Click.
snapped into place. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, this makes all the sense in the world. And it was like, it just, the sky opened up for me at that point. And,
That's why he said he actually says that from the beginning. He says you have to take this class twice, his drawing one class, because he says around the 7th, 8th week it starts to click.
yeah,
Then you go back through and then you can piece everything together, and that's why he would say you can't teach anyone to draw in 3 months or 10 weeks, but in 6 months you can achieve something quite amazing.
yeah. Well, I got a very, very, what I felt was a very, very good introduction to what he was talking about. And then when I say I could kick myself, it's because more recently, I would say it was only maybe a couple of months, maybe a month before he passed away, that I had been thinking about him for a long time, and I've always spoken to him about to people who've asked me, who have been like the most influential teachers, or just want to start getting into concepts of design or composition, and it comes up, and I say, well, he's got DVDs on his work, and you want to look him up. He's on YouTube, and it'll open your world to a whole realm of design that you just haven't ever previously thought about, and probably a good thing. And so I've spoken about him often, and I was thinking about him, and I moved here to Easton.
Yeah, Easton.
And yeah, right. And
I grew up in Easton.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, actually, I grew up. I lived there for about maybe 4 years when I was a kid. So I went. That's where I first went to school. I went first, second, and third grade there.
I'm not sure that I hear very, very good things about the school here, but maybe elementary school is supposed to be okay. But
no, in elementary school, this is what our elementary school was. Before I was in third grade, I remember 2 students getting yelled at for raping a little girl with a stick. Okay, that's Easton. And every day we would go out, and there would be 2 playgrounds next to each other. And so all of us, especially the boys, we would go through the first playground, and then there was a hole in the fence, and we'd go into the second playground, and then we would create a circle. Now remember, this first, second, third grade.
Yeah.
And I guess even up to 5th grade, right? And then we would beat the shit out of each other. And we would have a circle, and it was basically like an elementary school version of Fight Club, and we would beat each other. And it was the greatest, most fun thing ever. And I got myself beat, but most of the time I was in the top. I was a fighter back then. So
lucky for you.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was tremendous amounts of fun, and it was raw. It was jungle-like. It was incredible. It was an incredible experience. I do have this one bad memory. I remember this this older kid, and he came up and he pushed me down or something, and I was down, and I looked up, and I'm like, and I went and I punched him in the balls.
Oh my God.
At least I tried to. I don't know if he had him or if I missed or something, and he just looked at me and beat the hell out of me. It was like, I was like, what? Yeah, so that was my childhood in Easton. It was, for whatever reason, I look back on it with very, very fond memories.
Well, of course, and most of us do look. I mean, I don't know, but I think a lot of us do look upon our childhood with fond memories, and especially if, like you said, that you were performing kind of in the top tier, like you were doing okay, physically. So it's when it's lopsided in the other direction that people kind of generally have bad memories of it, especially if there's injustice involved.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah, but in any case, so I moved here, and I was thinking of contacting him, and I did, and I called him, and I just I wanted to go over and see him again, and it had been like so many years, and I was thinking, God, I just feel like, I like to reconnect with those people
Indeed.
that were, I don't know, my senseis, so to speak, those people that made a real difference in my life and in my understanding of art, and kind of like recontextualized everything for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then we just didn't get our plans like situated like in time, and he had already closed his school, and
Mm.
and I didn't know that he was sick, because I guess he just didn't tell me. But anyhow, that's where I say I could kick myself, because I sure would have liked to just visit with him, if even only for an afternoon.
Yeah.
Just hold him in such high regard, and it's just one of those disappointing things in myself. Like, I'm disappointed in myself for allowing life to, for having the excuse that I was just so busy and I couldn't make the time to see him. And that's one of my, disappointments.
Yeah, I feel you. It's a weird thing because there's two parts of my brain that says, yes, feel bad you didn't take the responsibility to make that thing happen. And the other part of my brain says, chill out because maybe there was a reason for it not to happen. And when I look at your artwork and I know the rigor of training with Myron, there would have been aspects that would have been assets to what you're producing now. And there's moments of magic in your work that I don't see in any of his students.
Well, thank
And
you.
and so and one of them is your line work, and especially in your drawings. Where a lot of times people will say that people who come from Myron Studios are very rigid. And there's a reason why, because we run so many lines and so many things are locked into things. And because of the training, unless you're with him for a while, okay, there's a difference between the people who study with him for maybe, a quarter or maybe even a year or two versus the people who've been with him for, 10, 20 years. And I've talked about this with Myron before, where his focus was on the foundations, and he didn't care if you had 40 years experience or if this was the first time you picked up a pencil. Everyone started at the same place, and he drilled in these foundations. And in that part of that foundations, like, you're trying to understand what these grids are. You're trying to understand the importance of them. And then also what happened a lot of times is, and this used to break my heart, a lot of people who would come to study with him were so blown away by the amount of knowledge and information that they never were given before. I remember a story of a painter who had a 40-year career, and he went into Myron's studio and saw what the 16-year-old kids were doing, and he literally dropped to his knees and wept because, he was a famous painter. Like, he had an incredible living, but as an artist, someone who was serious about his craft, he was never introduced to these systems before. And, I mean, when you have a little studio like Myron did, and you're training, professional artists, all, a whole gambit of artists, and the ones that come to you who go into college end up winning over $4 million in scholarships, like, you're doing something right, but because he was so focused on those foundations and because the systems were so new to people, it took a while for people to really learn how to make it malleable. And so a lot of the work would come out a little more rigid. And what was strange is, if you look at Myron's work, it ain't rigid. He has beautiful, graceful lines, very much like your lines. And he understood emotion and all these things, but he wouldn't teach you that stuff because he would say, you haven't, where you haven't earned the right to be creative until you've learned, the science and the rigor and the basics and the fundamentals, right? I mean, he would equate it to like language. It's like, you're not ready to write a novel. You haven't even learned how to spell your name, like, so, I was looking at your work, and I know Donna said that you studied at Meyer, and I'm like, I'm seeing some things, but I'm not seeing like certain things,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
and I don't mean that in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love the amount of fluidness in your work, like the lines. Obviously, when you bring it into the paintings, you're carrying it over, but your ability to make quote unquote something realism, like have a level of realism to it, and yet at the same time catch us into that dream moment, right? Where as your eyes are flowing through the lines and you're in the forms, it's real. And yet we're not getting the sense like you're trying to make us, live in that room that you created. It's like we're living in your perception of that room, or your moment in that experience in that room, or with that model, or whatever it is. Like it's like this in between, and it's at least that's how I was like feeling when I'm looking at your work, and I was like, damn, this is like magical, man. Like this is cool.
Thank
So
you.
it was a great experience flicking through your work, and I was like, damn, I could do this for like 2 hours. Like, just like,
There's a lot of work. You could do it for 2 hours.
well, not,
Thanks.
yeah,
Um,
but just it was that much of an enjoyment.
well, you know what? Thanks, and that may be in some sense because my foundation um, was, well, when you mentioned comics,
Mm-hmm.
that was I think for a lot of us, in particular young men, and comics were our early introduction to anything visual and that had some sort of power and that we could relate to. So I think like when as a teenager, when I heard you say that's what you liked, that was my early introduction. And of course, movies were,
Mm-hmm.
um, but the visual form and storytelling,
Yes.
and and it wasn't just storytelling. It was what resonated was heroic storytelling,
Mm.
and it was towards the good as a value. So
Mm-hmm.
that it's that kind of thing that you start overlapping things. That the drawing was fun and accessible. Um, there's storytelling, and it's not like you're going to be like a superhero, but each of us had sort of. I mean, that's what it is to be. Excuse me. That's what it is to be a human being, that you have challenges, you have adversity that you
Mm-hmm.
face, and that in the face of adversity you could call upon lessons that you learned through heroic literature. And as children, that resonated very deeply with me, and I think with a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't even know what we were doing. We were just reading it, but that's the appeal. Um, and so then from there I got into, I mean, that was my early interest, and science fiction and fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to work for Marvel Comics. Like I just dreamt of it. And then I did, very as a teenager, like I started illustrating for comics, and very quickly moved on to expanded that realm of things, um, and found that like what I had as a sort of dim idea in my head, it wasn't entirely clear, but in some way it was. It was this kind of romanticized, um, heroic visual poetry
Yep.
that appealed to me, that I could not have said it at the time, but I understand it better now.
Yeah.
Um, and that it had a trajectory through time, um, and it was in service to the value of life as a
Mm.
value,
Indeed.
and so all of that, like it's taken a whole lot of reading, a whole lot of study, a whole lot of like, just research to figure out why I am attracted to one, to a certain set of ideas, and repelled and repulsed by other ideas. Um,
I love
so,
that, man.
well, thanks. So anyhow, so the artwork in particular, like you're saying the line work or the paintings. I mean, like it's not an exact copy of what's there. It's this kind of romanticized poetry that has a particular philosophical
Yep.
underpinning that I'm trying to work through and clarify while I'm working, but imposing that filter of the world on it, if that makes any sense.
That makes, hey, at my school, I've had people who wanted to come and enroll, and I would not let them enroll because when looking at their artwork, I could tell that their view on life was cynical.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal in life is to flood the world with beauty. And I just think I don't care what your skill sets are. If your message is to, if your message isn't pure, then I don't want to give what I have to enable you to spread chaos. I actually do like a little talk kind of thing on Hitler and Rockwell, and the fact that both of these people use design, composition, drawing, like visuals, right, to help fashion a national identity. But to what end, right? So you have this Rockwellian experience. Was it real? No, it's a romantic idea, but it's a great idea for us to live up to.
Yeah.
And then you have, Hitler, on the other hand, making a national identity that, ultimately led to some very horrible stuff. And, but the tool was image making, both visually as well, or let's say storytelling, right? That's what their tools were. Um, through propaganda and videos or posters or just literally like even creating an environment for you to, from uniforms and architecture and all that stuff. I mean, so it, it it's very, what we do is extremely powerful.
Yeah.
And so uh, I always look at the heart of the person. What is it really inside of them that they want to communicate? And I like your heart, man. I like it a
Well,
lot.
thank you. I'm thinking about like what you're saying, and I'm thinking there's golly, it's like there's so many open doors that I'm like, oh gosh, which door should I walk through?
Walk through them all, man. We got
Well, if I
time.
can remember. So I think regarding like what's in people's heart, and I think there are two things that I think about that, and well, there's a saying by Carl Jung, which
Mm-hmm.
is really interesting, and it goes something like, people don't have ideas, ideas have people.
Ah, Shanala. Beautiful.
And it's kind of like this idea that all these concepts that we hold as truth or right and wrong and nobility and a lot of them are kind of the code that we've been programmed with since birth.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to distinguish, where we lie and what we actually believe in, and what we've just adopted kind of like as a default without really thinking about it too much, and can become trickier especially as you get older. Just trying to figure out, well, some people might be espousing ideas that they have only heard in circles around them,
Mm-hmm.
and when you research it a little bit further, you realize everything that you heard is actually not exactly what you believe. And so the process, which is again very, very Western, which I love so much, is this dialectic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It comes from like the Greeks, is of asking questions and trying to get to some more accurate definition of what actually might be a truth. Well, do you really believe that? So that's one door, that I was thinking about. And then the Hitler door, I was thinking that it's so easy for us, like today, to set him up as like a straw man and burn it down as like this evil character, and I think that does us a disservice, because one has to remember that it was people just like us that voted him into power, and so, and maybe with maybe not without good reason, when you consider, like, historically, again, just looking at the history of things, and understanding, like, the trouble that was happening right after World War One,
Sure.
with the Treaty of Versailles that made it impossible and bankrupted the whole country. So,
Yeah.
that people were literally starving. And there's stories of, I remember this one story of a guy who he took out his entire life savings, and and he was only able to purchase a cup of coffee.
Yep.
And that's just one person's story, but that is the story of a nation. And of course that's going to inflame people, and if it wasn't Hitler, it was going to be somebody else, because people are looking for a leader to save them from a terrible injustice. And one might go and say, well, Germany started the war.
Did they?
Not really, because there's like,
I thought it was like, why did France have to be such an asshole to Germany after the First War or whatever, right? And like then put more pressure and like dig their finger in to them, which ultimately created that pressure and that cluster beep.
Yeah, well,
that sparked it,
So it's like, I think it's a mistake to just hold up any one person and go, "There's the devil."
Yeah.
You know what? That's too simple. There's so many forces at work. And I think in some way, I got into conversation with somebody recently who was saying that the trouble that he had with Rockwell was that it was too simplified. And now I disagree with him. Like, I love Rockwell, and I love that aesthetic, and I yearn for something like that today.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of what's trendy right now in I guess you'd call it realism, where it's kind of destructive realism.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's painted really well, and then they kind of smear through it or destroy it in some kind of way. And I'm not quite in agreement with like the trajectory of that philosophy.
Yep.
And it bothers me somewhat. And I feel like when I look at a Rockwell, there's something that feels very, very right about it. So anyhow,
yeah, there's a lot of gimmicks in art.
Yeah.
A lot of gimmicks and a lot of things when you're seeking for truth, but you don't know where it is, I just think the whole wave of realism. Now I'm going to make a blanket statement, but understand that within inside that statement there are remnants of people that this doesn't apply to. But just as a general blanket statement, I think realism for the most part is a gimmick. It's a gimmick. Look at I have this great skill. I'm great, but what are you saying? Where's the emotion? Where's the heart? Where's the life? There's no life in it. There's a beautiful little scripture in the Bible. New Testament, I believe Paul says, he says, you have the forms of godliness, but you lack the power of God, right? But there is no God in that thing, right? So on the outside, it has a form of this thing, of this great thing, but but the function is not there. And so it looks at a glance like, wow, this could be great art. And then I always say it this way. When I'm training my students, I always say there's the macro of the art and then the micro. And the macro is like walking into a bar and seeing a beautiful woman across the bar, and you're like, ooh, and you go to her, right? And then you ask her name, and she just drools on herself and like blinks. She has no brain. There's nothing there, and you know, it's cool. It's cool. She looks great, but there's no conversation in it. There's no micro. There's nothing. There's no new meat in it, right? And I just see a lot of abstract expressionism that way. It's bold, it screams, and then you go up and it's just chaos. And then on the other extreme, you have this highly rendered, skillful piece that again is extremely attractive. It grabs your attention, but when you go and you begin to have a conversation with it, it's only one layer deep. There's not much there, and then well, how do we make it art? Well, let's smear things on it, or let's burn the edges, or let's add gimmicks to it. Let's paint with gold paint instead of regular paint, or whatever it might be, right? And someone once told me that the answers lie in the heart, because long before the brain, not long before, but before the brain, when you're being formed as an embryo, before the brain is formed, the heart is formed. And it's when you start to look at it that way, it's like, whoa, where's the pulse? Where is the design? Where is the rhythms? Where are the thing that actually circulates us through this experience? Because if it's not there, then all it is, your painting is just all out of the brain. It's all academic. And as Picasso said, when you make love to a woman, you don't start by measuring her.
I'm thinking about like the way you began, and like by saying, like, to a large extent, I'm going to paraphrase, but to a large extent, like a lot of realism is gimmicks, and I'm thinking that there's a difference, and then where you went, and so like the substance of it, the macro and the micro and that kind of thing, and I'm thinking. What really, really appeals to me about realism is that it's. Let's see if I can sum this up without going on like the longest tangent. Well, it's not a tangent; it's what we're talking about. But it was. Well, let me stop there. Let me back up. So well, I don't know. I'm sorry.
All right. Take your time. I'm going to eat a pretzel.
It was intentionally, like the project of realism was an intentional thing. It wasn't by accident. And so you figure in some sense that humanity, like in its evolution, like as creatures, we're around in our present form for about, maybe 200,000 years or more. That's what the evidence sort of like shows. And it's only at a certain point in the history of humanity that there's this small group of people in the ancient Greeks around those islands that start to work out something philosophically, and it's that ideal, those ideas, that what they call the logos, which would later be simplified as Christianity, but this concept that there's something larger than yourself, and that like it's all logical. You look outside and there are these cycles of life, and you have life coming into being sustained and then destroyed and then reborn again. Mm-hmm. And that kind of mythology is like present in all cultures, as far back as we can see in all their mythology. And then you have these strange group of people, that are the ancient Greeks, which is like the roots of our Western culture. And philosophically, they are linking the logos and logic to the representation of man and the good that we might today call God in man, and that you could organize a society and values of how to treat each other, and the concept of the individual and of heroism and everything that later becomes what we have, is those are the roots of it. And you see that what they were seeking for at the time was a way of representing that visually. And it wasn't clear because like no other culture in the history of the world, like 200 or so thousand years, 250,000 years, whatever, nobody had ever done that. No culture had ever done it.
Haven't done what?
Had taken this thing, this logic that we see, this greatness, this concept of the good, of nature, of this thing that is marvelous and wonderful and organized in such a way that it's got this invisible hand that you can see. Say,
can I challenge you on that?
Well, sure.
Because I'm thinking, well, what about your Mesopotamian cultures, your Sumerian cultures, your Egyptian cultures that came before the Greek culture? So are they not doing that, or how would you see the difference?
So I think you're right to point that out. So here's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Egyptian artwork doesn't change. It's rigid and structured. It's so like it doesn't change for 3 or 4 or 10,000 years. It just stays static, right? It's a static thing. With the Greeks, you see them working through this idea. They start to measure things, and in the 6th century, their art is they're like struggling, and you see them start to look at the measurements of man and their sculpture, and it within a couple of hundred years, they're doing the work on the Parthenon, and they have these works that are like Michelangelo type of sculpture, just so stunningly beautiful. And that's no accident. And no other culture ever did. You don't see that in Mesopotamia. You don't see that in Egypt. You never ever see that as a response to philosophy in any other culture except for the Greeks. And it's they have their kind of group of islands, and they're contentious, and they have like so it's only around for a little while, but the Romans sort of pick it up, and they do something different. But then of course it goes quiet for about 1,000 years, and it's reborn again in the Renaissance more recently. And then it's only a couple of hundred years before you have everything that we have now, which is, they pick up science again, and they pick up these values that are romanticizing the heroism of men as a value, and trying to work that out philosophically in the artwork. Anyhow, all of that is the project of realism. So I agree with you. To lose touch with that is simply just to copy what's there.
Yep.
And maybe it's a good idea to look back at the history and reconnect with things that so that one could produce art with intention.
That's it. And
sorry, it was a really long.
No, it was beautiful, man. I love that.
Okay.
I like that you used the word logos, because that is that Greek word, which ultimately means like the black and white word, like what you write down. It's like a logo, right? It's this tangible concept.
Sure. It's also where we get logic from.
Exactly.
It's this kind of like invisible thing. Like what I was going to say is like you can't see air, but you can feel its presence. You can.
Well, then you want to be careful with that, because that's a different word. That's rhema, which is the spirit of the word, and
Right.
the
Right.
logos is the logic of the word. And I think if you only focus on the spirit, the rhema, you end up with abstract expressionism. If you only focus on the logic, you end up with realism. And I think art is the combination of both. Like your work, you have the skill of a realist, but you have the heart of an abstract, like of an abstraction expressionist. Like, and I look at you as like a Frank Frazzetti almost, where you're you you got the skill, but like Frank said, the more and more I get into making art, and I focus on my compositions, the more and more I realize I'm more of an abstract artist, right? And he didn't make abstract art. It was in that underlined invisible aspect of art that he was being abstract, and the context on top, it was highly skilled. But um but I think if you separate them, you end up going into these two camps of the highly skilled and then the highly expressive. And I think, at least for me, if you can have the mind of a realist and the heart of an expressionist and blend them together, that's where the magic is. And that's what I'm seeing in your work. It's like your brain is fully engaged. It's both right and left. It's present and it's also eternal. It's romantic but also real, and I think that's where most artists would love to be. Um, but it requires work. It requires a lot of work, and not the work in just the labor of being in a studio, but also the labor of studying philosophy and being self-aware and being conscious that there is a visible reality, and that you're getting to know it. And then how do you translate that into your language? In our case, it's visual language. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I see a balance in the next 20 to next maybe 15 to 30 years, a balance coming. So like in the art, where we will respect skill, come back to studying it, but also bring in this need to connect with human beings on an emotional level, not just on an intellectual one. And
Wow. Yeah. I would believe in that as well, like optimistically. In general, I'm
optimistically.
well, in general, I am kind of an optimistic person, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that realism has that trajectory, through time, and its initial roots with a certain optimism about the potential of humanity and what we're capable of, uh, and that's super. I mean, that's Western ideals, like, is to like be able to take apart the equation and understand it and see how things are made, and um, that the good is within us, and that you can structure societies and you can make visual art from that. um, it's that's all very, very optimistic. It's very grand, and it's very Greek. You don't really have that in other cultures. You just at their roots, they're just different philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, like the abstract expressionist work, and the abstract work, um, from my studies, is really more of a turning away from those values, um, of the rational, and it's it starts to take place around the industrial period, and roughly as a response to the Age of Enlightenment. And it's got some of its roots in Kant's critique of pure reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, like a lot of the work at that time in our last century is this kind of deliberate turning away from humanity as divine creatures,
Yep.
like after World War I and leading up to it, sort of, it's this dissolution and like desperate kind of rejection from all the values that we had previously held, and just to say,
And that's why art sucks.
well, and so I think, like, yeah, maybe, and
Because if you think about the conversation, like if you go into a place that they're training you, what conversation would you hear more often? Feel your way through the art, do what feels right to you, just explore it and go that way. Or there is an absolute design pre-planning to it. And I guess like when we were growing up, I would say that the first one was far more of what we heard. Now things are starting to change, and I think that's where like the realism schools come in, where they're trying to tap into that second mentality.
well, sure, people have like a need for the good.
Certainty. Yep.
Yeah, for certainty, for good, and for communication, and like, well, okay, so we've expressed for 100 or so years for that there is no so that humanity is not even worth representing. Let's put it that way, and so that any kind of sentiment or representation or merit associated with skilled craftsmanship is not even worth looking at. We've experimented with that, and I don't think that it does much to fulfill the soul.
I would agree with you, but let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Is it really the pushing away of humanity, or is it really pushing away of the divine?
Well, it's both,
Okay.
It's both. And so, like, it starts to have, and in some sense, maybe not without good reason. Again, there's I don't want to set it up as like this straw man to just be able to easily burn down and call it evil. The structure of the Christian mythology was so rigid that it plunged us into darkness, and moved away from science and moved away from conversation. And
I'm not sure that's true.
Well,
I always when I hear that argument, I always go to people, go back and look at the people who pioneered these great movements in science and medicine and all those things. And most of the time, you'll probably find out that they were men of incredible faith who felt that they were on a mission to do something because of their faith. And in pushing through the unknown, they end up discovering or figuring out things. And it was really not their drive to push away God, but to really understand their relationship with God and humanity and the earth and push through. And they acquired great, knowledge and had work ethic and all these things and creativity. It wasn't to disprove or to separate. It was actually their work of faith that led them to discovering these things. And so I would love for someone to write a list of the people who were just all about the logic and nothing about the faith that actually produced great things. And I would say that list is probably very, very small compared to the.
I don't know. So I can, so all right. Before we get too much into into that, but I would respond by saying that the beginnings of Christian art was a deliberate turning away from what they considered pagan values, and pagan were the Greco-Roman type of traditional work, and so there was even a schism between East and West in Christian thought about whether or not even to have any kind of visual representation at all, which of course comes from Judaism, which didn't have any, and so they made a deliberate attempt to move away from anything that showed skill and merit and design. And so like a lot of the work from the Middle Ages was rather crude, and it had a different type of design, but it was a movement towards representing, if I'm going to be more charitable, the concept of the divine in an iconic kind of way, but nothing that was related to humanity and life as a value, but the concept of the divine as sort of iconic. And it's only when Constantinople falls, and that's kind of an important date, because right after that you have the discovery of America, and you have trade picking up, and you have the Renaissance, and you have the Medicis, and everybody's looking. You have humanism, and the values of humanism are in direct contrast to their human values. They're all centered around like the ideas of humanity. Shakespeare comes up, and Shakespeare is so lauded because it's the first time in over 1,000 years that you could have writing about human motivation, human thought, human feelings, and you wouldn't be crushed by like all the previous writing was about the mythology, nothing about people and feelings. And the power of art resurfaces because it becomes apparent that, like what you were saying earlier, there's a real power in art, in the sense that if you like Beethoven and I like Beethoven, we're less likely to kill each other.
Indeed.
And there's a real recognition in that fact that as people, we're violent. We have that potential for mayhem and chaos and evil, and that art can do something to bring us together and civilize us. And that's the project of realism. And the Age of Enlightenment, gives rise in science, immediately starts to answer questions that create conflict with the mythology that presented itself as an absolute. And that's where, like, so the abstraction, what I was going to say is the Academy, like that was holding forth with ideas, was a little too rigid. There's like, you have your own history. Painting is the greatest type of painting, and so of course you're going to have people rejecting that notion, as you have like the primacy of individualism becoming a value more. Again, people are going to say, no, there are other ways to do things. And so they start to reject it, and you get Impressionism, and then you get some sort of sympathetic response to that, but you get symbolism, and then surrealism that's also, again, a direct response to looking at the rational view of things and just deliberately making it irrational, with no meaning whatsoever, just juxtaposing elements that and using realism as a gimmick, like you were saying, but just confusion. And then abstraction, like, gradually gets more and more ground, after World War I, where the intelligentsia is able to say, humanity is not this divine, great, wondrous, splendid being that's represented by the Greeks, what you've been trying to paint in your paintings and show in your sculptures. Humanity is this horrific monster that consumes itself. And I mean, a certain amount of that's true too. Like, just to be alive, right? Our daily existence requires that we
and
kill.
I think that's bullshit.
Okay, go. I want to hear what you
You
have to
know,
say.
I like that the intelligentsia,
Uh huh.
right? The people who don't fight wars but send the young men to fight the wars for them. Um, have you ever seen a show called Boston Legal?
No.
Oh my God, it was an incredible lawyer show. My
Okay.
favorite part was at the end where the old lawyer and the young lawyer would sit and have a cigar and drink their little scotch and just philosophize for a moment at the end of every show. But the first one I ever saw, the lawyer went to a bar and this brute of a man comes over and tries to pick up his girlfriend or whatever. If he got in a fist fight with that guy, he would have been killed. So what did he do? He went and basically paid another guy to go fight his battle. And so at the end, when he's doing his lawyery thing, he admits to his fault. And he said, something along the lines like, I was a coward because I didn't fight my own fight. I sent other people to fight. And he was the intelligentsia, right? This elite class of overthinkers who um, uh, would not get their hand dirty. And so I find it funny how we have billions of people, probably back then millions of people, and this small group of people are saying, hey, humanity is horrible and horrific, and all they do is kill each other. And what they're really saying is, but we don't. They do. The masses, those dirty masses, right? And yet the masses are not the people who kill each other unless they're basically lied to and then equipped by this small group of people. Like the masses, they want the same thing. Just leave me alone. Let me have peace. Let me go eat and take care of my family. I don't really have any desire to get up and go to war for the hell of war. They're usually a small group of people who are fighting over land or money or power, and then they send the masses out to war. So I'm not really a believer in the idea. I mean, look at the internet. How many stories do you hear of people, you know, oh, I know those people are on vacation. Let me go rob their house, or I know where they live. I'm going to go kill their family and steal their children. I mean, for the amount of information that we share nowadays online, the amount of violence and stupidity and I shouldn't say stupidity, but like this horrific ideal is very, very like almost non-existent. I mean, it exists because there are sick people, but I'm not a believer in the idea that humans are really this horrible thing.
So I'm in agreement with you. Like I say, like that. I'm generally more optimistic, but what I think is say part of Schopenhauer's philosophy and a recognition that um, recognizing the horrible aspect of humanity, in a sense, is that say a very real example might be just for us to live, to
Mm-hmm.
sustain our living. Uh, Something else must die and we must consume it.
Now, why is
And
that a human thing?
that's a life thing.
Exactly.
That's a life thing. And so it's that's part of this recognition that and a turning away from like that's part of the project of making artwork that turns away from humanity as the good and recognizes that there's something in life that's actually kind of monstrous, that consumes and
And
destroys. And hey,
and
that's
that's that, and that's our perspective. We're putting that story onto it,
uh-huh.
right?
Well, I mean,
I
it's
mean,
part of nature. Like
it it,
nature,
it
it
is.
it brings into being, it sustains being, and it destroys, and then recreates again. That's the cycle of things.
And then
So
if it is just nature, it is just life, right? Um, but what happens is when we say it's monstrous or this or that, we're putting now a moral judgment on it. And it was very interesting, in Christian Judaism, even in Islamic like thinking, when you go back to this Adam and Eve origin story, the sin, well, I always say is self-doubt, but the manifestation of that self-doubt or disbelief in oneself is this your life is sustained, aka eating of something, off of what are they eating? This knowledge of this is good and that is evil, right? And it's the thing that separates and kills us is this need to constantly deem or say this is good, this is evil. What's interesting is when you read that story of Adam and Eve, I don't look at it as a literal story, but looking at it as a mythology, right? These two people individually make this decision, and now they bring into their existence this moral judgment on things. This is good, this is evil. Their offspring being bred under that reality, ultimately both want to serve their God, but one sacrifices meat, one sacrifices wheat or whatever, ground. And now they're in competition about whose worship is better, which ultimately leads to the first murder in this mythology. So when you begin to morally judge things, it brings the consequence of that brings death, soul death. The next generation of that brings a competition between each other. Now we're, competing with each other about what is moral and not, which then ultimately leads to the first physical death, right? In this story. And so, but it's really difficult to have a philosophy of living where you're not putting moral judgments on things. It's very, very hard.
Well, of course, and you're not going to get that really in a sense because as the kind of creature that we are volitional creatures. We have to choose what choice by our choices, how to sustain our existence. And so some choices are better than other choices. And not everyone, let's say that intelligence is not given with any sort of equanimity, so that we're not all equally intelligent, all equally able to make like good choices. And so for leaders that are potentially, that's the intelligence in a sense, like the history of it is we look for people, that 1% of people that may be smarter, that make better choices and can lead us, that are stronger than us or whatever it is, and protect our little tribe. And, because the history of us, as creatures, is that you once you start to have a little bit of prosperity and safety, well, then the other tribes want a piece of that.
Sure.
And so, I mean, that's the kind of creature we are. And so you're always going to be, making judgments as to every aspect of life. Is it good? Is it bad? Am I using my time effectively? Are those conversations that I'm having, are those ideas good or bad? And
I had a friend who once said, why don't you replace good and bad with things like effective or healthy? Or, and now those aren't moral judgments. Those are things that you can put on a scale. They're rational. They're like, is this really the most effective thing? It doesn't mean that what I'm doing is bad. It doesn't mean I'm going to burn in hell for eternity. It doesn't mean, is it effective? And then that comes down to, well, then asking yourself, well, what are your values? What is your story? What is it that you want in life? Is this it might be effective for this person. It's not effective for you, right?
Well, then if you follow it back, effective, what you said is, what do you want in life? And I think then life becomes the absolute, because you essentially want to live. You have to make choices that sustain your life, and everything can be measured against that. Is it effective? And it's not effective to be selfish in a bad way.
Well, what happens if you adopt a philosophy where? What happens to the one who adopts a philosophy that living, meaning like just staying alive, isn't really the number one priority, but you embrace your death, and maybe for one person it might be.
Well, maybe then it's not so effective for their life, right? Then they can end it very quickly.
Well, but what where their value is may not be on how long can I live per se, but what can I do that might have the greatest impact on what can I create that might have the greatest impact long after I'm gone. So now maybe it's not just about your story, but understanding what was your function or your purpose in this place. And that may not mean that you live 120 years. It might mean you live 3 years. But in 3 years, what can you achieve that will thousands of years later still resonate?
Um,
And to
yeah,
do that, you've already made the conscious decision that you're giving up life. You're giving up maybe
sure. Yes.
kids and marriage and all these other things for this ideal that you just literally put yourself into.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, essentially, yeah, I'm in agreement with you in that, like, every decision that you're making from, is saying, well, this is worth dying for, because I mean that's where we're all headed, and so every decision that you make is a decision as to how you're going to use up the seconds and the minutes of your life.
mm-hmm,
So getting back to what we said earlier, like with the creation of artwork with intention,
mm-hmm,
is also to live a life with intention, you know,
indeed.
and continually trying to um, analyze that and trying to figure out like what that intention is, and is it a productive or destructive kind of thing, and what does that intention serve anyhow.
What was that comment that you made in the beginning? Something like, it's not like I'm going to miss say it, but you say it correctly. It's something like the human doesn't have the message, but the message has the human.
That's Carl Jung. Ideas,
That's what it
people
is.
do not have ideas. Ideas have people. And so, like, that whole thing then is like, I spend almost every day, um, the beginning of the day, I wake up and I kind of try and read, because it's interesting to me, like, to try and understand where the ideas that I have in my head come from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always looking for texts written by people that are far more intelligent than I am. When I'm painting, I'm listening to lectures, and by people that are far, that's their area of expertise. So that history has, like, ideas have a trajectory like through time, and so you start to kind of understand, oh my goodness, I thought that I understood this, or these are where these ideas come from. But
Mm-hmm.
if you lived at a different time period, in a different country, and a different gender, like, you might not even have these things that construct the very foundation of what you consider your identity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a head trip. you
Well,
know
it is.
so in any case,
Here's a head trip.
yeah.
I like the idea of this, that the ideas have you, because once you start, and I love the word that you use, life. I had a friend 20 years ago. He's like, I will never call God God anymore. I'm like, really? How can you not do that? He's like, it's life. And now that's all I say, life with a capital L,
Yeah.
right? I love it because it separates you from all the pre-programmed things that come up when you say God. Um, but in Jewish faith, they don't even, they have a name for God or whatever, but they'll call him Hashem because it just means the name, right? Like it's kind of the same thing. It's like a different way of calling this abstract, undefinable reality that of potential that exists called life. This energy, but and and what's interesting is one of the things I'm pushing myself through is it is not just, I used to say, yeah, I want to take this knowledge that I have and spread it around the world, right? But now it's like I'm at a different level with it, because not only do I want to go international, but I want to go intergenerational with it, right? So that now I'm actually building something that is just not going width but depth. And when I started thinking about the ascending generations, it then made me look at my who I am in terms of my I'm sorry, the descending generations as being a descendant of ancestors, right? And asking myself, why am I so focused on teaching, design, composition, and storytelling, and then finding someone like Myron who really kind of helped me see, oh my gosh, like there's something here, which then led me to other people throughout history and finding like there are two groups in the art. I mean, there's a bunch of groups. One group are the performers, the artists, and then every like generation or whatever, there's like this very, very small group of teachers, master teachers, right? And sure, they had the skills to be an artist, but that's not what their function really was. Their greatest value was actually, in a sense, birthing this whole new wave of artists. And it was strange in doing this research. I found 300 years ago, there was a guy in the area of Spain in which my family comes from, having my surname, my mother's name, I guess I should say, Castro, from the same area. And he was an artist. He went to Italy, studied, came back, and then he was brought in by the king to um, it was, they said that something like they wanted to restore the glory of the Art Academy of Spain, right? The Royal Academy. And his philosophy was you have to study anatomy, which to me is your drawing skills, your rendering skills, your logic skills, things like that. And you have to study geometry. Like that was the two things he said. If you don't study these two things, you're not going to restore it. And so he was set to task to basically reinstitute those things. And when I'm looking at it, I'm like, what the hell? Like that freaked me out.
Because that's what you're doing.
That's exactly. And then on top of it, like my name isn't Don. It's, my middle name is Victor. So I went by Victor, and my students started calling me Don Victor, right?
It's great.
Like,
it's a great name.
Right? I'm like, what the hell's up with this? They're like, you're not Victor, you're Don Victor. And so I go back to, so I embrace it. And then I find this guy, and his name was Don Felipe de Castro, right? I'm Don Victor de Castro, right? So it was like, what the hell? And Don wasn't his name, it was his title, right? So it was. So now at the academy, we have people who are called Dons and Donas when they come to a place where they can help facilitate other people through this process, right? But my point is, you start to realize that life, it has a story that it's playing out. It's his story, right? I mean, history, like you're part of something far bigger than your little, 80, 90, 100 years on earth. Like you're just a moment that an important moment, but you're just like you're a needle and there's a thread that's being pushed through you. And the deception is to say, oh, I am the beginning and the end of this. But when you realize that you're just a moment, and therefore there's a great responsibility to connect the future and the past, it changes the way that what you see, what's important in life and things. And I don't know, man, it's kind of freaky. It's a little, sure. It's freaky. The best way I can explain is this. I was raised in foster care, so I was bouncing around all these homes. And I was probably about 5 years old when I got into there. But I was almost 30 before I got to go back and see my father's family. And my father passed away when I was like 5, 6 years old. So when I went down and I met them, it was the freakiest thing to see on a mantle them having a picture of me when I was a little kid.
Wow.
Right? Like I had this whole entire life. Like, and inside that picture was my little sister. And back in the days, we used to call her Boom Boom. They're like, "Well, how's Boom Boom?" I'm like, "Who the hell's Boom Boom?" Right? Like, oh my gosh! Like, we haven't thought about my sister in 30 years. Like, Boom Boom, right? And like, they had a version of me and my brother and my sister that existed in their life for 30 years that we had no idea who that person was. And yet it was us. It was a very trippy experience. Um, and now it's like, how many, like, your teachers, they had a moment with you, right, Dorian? And like 20, 30 years later, they remember you, but they don't know who you are. Like, there's a version of you that exists in that little tribe, in that little moment. And we probably have thousands of versions of ourselves, all
Yeah,
over the place. It's
yeah, yeah.
it's very matrixy in a
That's
weird way.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's very, very interesting. I like that a lot. Uh-huh.
So
Wow. Yes, that's really interesting.
hold on, let me take a swig of this funny grass. No, I'm just joking.
Boy,
Yeah,
that's great. Good stuff.
but it's funny. It was something I saw in your work. I was like, that kind of reminded me of that, and I was like, oh my god, I love this because I thought I thought something happened with my eyes, and I'm like, and I had to stop, go back and look at the image, and then literally, I had to count the limbs on this figure, and I realized you put a second set of arms in there,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, whoa, that's so cool, like, because when you first look at it, it it's like you don't see it, but you pick it up, right? Because your mind sees the figure, everything's drawn nice, and you just, oh, two arms, two legs, but there isn't two arms, there's four arms, and I was like, oh my god, what a brilliant! It reminded me of a Degas technique, where if Degas is trying to capture the dance, he's not focused
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
drawing dancers, he's drawing the dance, and so he might break the dance down into three or four moves, right? And if you look at one dancer and you allow your eye to, oftentimes through the arabesque, to flow from one arabesque to the other, you realize by the time you get to that third or fourth figure in the image, it's only one dance, and he's showing you three or four different positions of that dance, the starting, the end, and maybe one or two in the middle. Um, and then when you allow your eye to flow through it, it's like all of a sudden the thing becomes an animation. Renoir did this when he had his three dancers. Um, Down in Philadelphia, I think last year, 2 years ago, they brought the dancer paintings in, and it's been 100 years since they've been in the same room. And he was commissioned to do these three paintings of these different types of dance. The dance for the people in the country, the people in I think a bar or something, and then people who are like elite, right? But what was gorgeous when they put it up, they just hung them to make it look pretty. And I thought to myself, nah, there's something off here. Something's really off. And these are the moments in which I feel like Indiana Jones when it comes to art. I really, it's like, and I said, something's off. He was a designer. And so I said, well, let me take this. And so I took the measurement of the one painting, and they were in different frames. So one looked bigger, but I was like, there's no way he made that one bigger than. So I cut away the frames. I looked at the ratio of the paintings, and they were all vertical. So I flipped the ratio horizontally, and I made the two paintings reciprocals, and then I centered the third. And when I locked them in, all of a sudden, all three paintings were connected.
Oh,
And
interesting.
and then when you looked at it, you realized the first painting was the first position of the dance. The second was the middle position. And the third painting was the finish movement of the dance. And then it animated. You just flowed through these three paintings and it became alive. And I was like, that's what the guy who owned that room, who owned that house, who commissioned Renoir, that's what he wanted. He wanted to experience the dance. He didn't want three pretty paintings of dancers. He wanted the dance. And what was beautiful was the commentary is it doesn't matter if you're a farmer or in a mansion, we all dance. And we're all dancing to the same song, right? I mean, when you get it from that perspective, it was just brilliant. But the Philadelphia Museum missed it because most people don't think as a composer or a designer; they're thinking as a painter or an artist or whatever, right? And they've missed the magic in that, and to have those three together in 100 years, they missed the whole thing. It was sad. But
That's interesting.
so normally when I start this conversation, I start it with a question.
So yeah, let's start our conversation.
Yeah.
Now that we have all that out of the way.
So what are you currently working on, man?
Well, actually, this I've posted a lot of drawings, in the last year or so, and that's actually because I had some commissions that were kind of private, and it was probably the better part of prudence not to post them, and so I've just finished off two very, very large paintings, commissioned paintings, and this month I've been getting together some work for a show online show actually, that's going to take place on, I think it's like next week, on the 1st of May. So, so this week I've sort of been trying to gather, and that's kind of interesting in some way, because the guy who's organizing the show is it's with this IX gallery, and they have a real appreciation for illustration.
Nice.
And the old illustration well, it's old now, I guess, but before it went digital, before everything went digital.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, he started collecting and loved all of the paintings that were being done for science fiction and fantasy predominantly. And when things started moving towards computers, he made a show. It was like a convention type of thing.
Yeah.
And specifically for the collectors that liked science fiction fantasy paintings, and wanted to continue. And he wanted to create a venue that would support people that wanted to paint and sell their paintings and connect the artists with the collectors. And so he's done that, and it's been every year increasingly more successful. And then he's, it's been opened up to painters as well, but I think it's generally still a little bit more geared towards illustration and science fiction and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't shown my illustrations. I stopped illustrating probably about like 25 years ago. And so then I did portraits for a number of years. But in any case, he thought it would be an idea to showcase some of my illustration work. So I thought, oh, heck, why not? And that might be kind of a fun thing to do. And so there'll be a lot of work on this IX gallery that opens on the 1st online. And
now they have a physical thing, I believe, too, right?
That's right.
The
right.
IX Con.
That's right.
Yeah, it's held maybe 15 minute drive from where I'm at.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like now it's in Reading. So
yeah, in Goggleworks. Yep.
Right. Oh, I didn't know you. So I'll probably head up there, in October, and stop by and say hi to everybody. So if you stop by, we can meet in person. Now that we've met virtually.
That would be awesome.
So anyhow, that's what I'm working on now, and then I'm always developing ideas. Working my sketchpad to develop ideas. Based on like our earlier conversation, just trying to have a deeper understanding of like what my mission is, and my vision is, and redefining that. And
so let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
And being deliberate in asking this.
Yeah.
Um, when you were between the ages of 12 and 15, what was your ideal of being an adult? Like being functional in the earth?
That's interesting. I'll be honest with you. Um, I don't think I had any concept of what it was to be functional or what I was going to do when I was between 12 and 15. Um,
Okay,
I
what were
just,
you passionate about when you were 12 to 15? What consumed besides boobies and comic books? What was what were you becoming passionate about or obsessed with?
think like at that time, I started playing a lot of tennis.
Really
And yeah, and sports.
interesting.
I've always been kind of athletic,
Hmm.
so I mean, that kind of appealed to me a lot, and I thought at one point that maybe I would be a tennis player, um, and I loved tennis, and I carried my racket with me to school, and I would have it right by my table, and I'd swing it, practicing as I moved from class to class in the hallway. Um, I think I probably have somewhat of like an obsessive personality.
Hmm. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what
yeah.
makes you great.
Well, thank you.
We want to make a moral judgment. Say, oh, that's wrong. You got OCD. Your person. It's like no, no, no. Maybe it's not effective for you, but as someone who has to be very precise and diligent in their craft, this is an asset.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's this
So
concept of like a magnificent obsession, and
yes.
that sort of puts a positive slant on things. And in any case, I it took me a while, like a long time, to understand even like what the concept of a mission in life would be.
Hmm.
uh, and I think that not to put my parenting down, but I think my parents had the idea um, that they would just let me be and let me figure it out on my own,
Yeah.
and that's very different than my concept of say teaching,
Yep.
which I think it's um, important to give opinions and stimulate thoughts and give everything that you have in a structured kind of way, and then leave it for your charge to make choices. That wasn't in any way part of my upbringing at all. Like it was sort of that I would be left to my own devices and figure out whatever I was going to do. So from 12 to 15, I just, it's just almost like a
So it was about tennis.
wolf. I was like a wolf in the wilderness, like no clue what I was doing whatsoever. It was like almost.
Well, it's that setting. That's why I asked this question, because there's this moment between those ages where you're too old to be a kid, but you're too
Yes.
young to be an adult. You're
Yeah.
going through puberty. You're going through all these changes. You're spending time alone. Um, so there's all of these amazing things that are converging. And I find that in that moment, a lot of people who end up doing great things, if you really talk to them, they kind of knew it around that time. It may have not been fully formed, but the essence of what they end up producing with their life came between those years. And now it's interesting. The biggest memory that you're talking really about is the tennis, which doesn't actually surprise me, to be quite honest, because when you can look, going back to the logos and the ramos, right? The logos is tennis, but what is the rama of that experience? What is the spirit or the essence? Not the nouns, but what's the verb, if you will? What's the thing that inspired you, about that tennis experience? And if you spend time in there, you might actually find um, the breath that of your mission.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I understood it at that time
hmm
pretty clearly. I mean, like in relation, what appealed to me
hmm
was that it was an individual sport. I
mm,
had been very, very good at soccer, but that was a collective, like, and it really, really bothered me that I was dependent on
Other people.
a team. And and
I feel you on that. I used to play soccer and I wrestled, and I absolutely loved wrestling because the only way I lost was because I lost.
yeah,
Right. I couldn't, it was, and also being an artist, I wanted to play football because I knew I could get aggression out and I would get the girls. But beyond that, what was greater, my fear was I was going to break my hands or hurt my hands. And so I was like,
yeah,
hell no.
yeah, sure.
So I
That's
like that.
exactly what I thought about football.
Oh, really?
I am not. I liked playing in the street, and and I loved catching the ball and running, but I had no desire to be crushed by somebody who's twice my weight and really maybe
Or blindsided because you don't, because at least if you're in a sport like tennis or wrestling, like your eyes are on your opponent. Like you don't, and there's a safety in that. It's like there's nothing going to hit you from behind or whatever and rob you.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, man. I always found actually really cool people who did both sports, like soccer and then wrestled, because to me there was actually a balance that came to them where they were individually powerful, but also knew how to work and lead and manage a team, right? Or be part of one.
Yeah.
And so with my son, I hate baseball, but his stepdad is now putting him in baseball. So I said, okay, buddy, that'll be you and the doctor's thing, right? You guys go do that. And but at least he's in a team sport. And then I put him in capoeira, which is a team environment, but at the end of the day, it's one-on-one. And so, I would have preferred him in a different sport than baseball, but I'm just happy that he's in a team sport and he's doing something he likes. But I don't care what the sport is, but it was my intention to see him in two sports, one solo, one team oriented.
Yeah.
Now, do you still approach life with a similar philosophy?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Like the individual reigns supreme, and that's very much I exercise with that intention to, it has a lot like to do with that Greek ideal of the healthy body and the healthy mind. So, referencing your question about food in your questionnaire, it's all healthy, clean eating, and then almost every day we exercise together. It's my girlfriend and I, and whether it's running or biking or playing tennis or going to the gym or and then like studying as well and drawing. So
do you think potentially maybe your mission is really, let's say not your mission, but your message, through your work? Do you think is the promotion of a healthy mind, a healthy body, a healthy individual?
I guess so. Maybe. I mean, I've been asked that question, I guess at some point in the past, often enough, and I probably should have a better answer. And there's something about me that shies away from being too clear about what I'm trying to offer to anybody else. And it's probably the reason why I haven't started teaching yet, although I think that like teaching is such a noble endeavor and that I probably should be doing some of it. But there's part of me that's just trying to fix myself.
Sure.
Trying to understand myself and trying to clarify the ideas that have me and trying to separate all that out into something that makes sense before I'm too clear about what I'm trying to say it means to anybody else. I don't know, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Okay. It's like when you're on an airplane, you got to put your own mask on first before helping the little children,
Yeah.
And I remember when since we're talking about teaching and helping others, the I would often ask people when they would tell me, "Oh, I want to be a teacher." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Why would you want to be a teacher?" And oftentimes it meant like a teacher at a high school or something. And they would say, "Well, because it's a steady paycheck. I get
Yeah.
benefits. I get the summers off." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." But I remember there was this one girl, I guess. I asked her that question, and she said, I love reading so much that I want to share that with other people
Hmm.
and help inspire, the next generation of people to love literature." And I was like, I got turned on.
Yeah,
I was
for
like,
sure.
oh my God, you're going to be awesome. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and it's the same with psychology. A lot of times I meet people who want to become a psychologist or that go into that field. And I'll ask them, why they want to do it. And literally, like probably 19 out of 20 people will say something like, well, I had a messed up life, and and I think by helping other people, I'll help myself, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you selfish bastard. Like, why don't you go fix yourself? And then at least you can then lead and guide people because you've gone through the damn process, right? Like it intimately. You're not experimenting on these people who are coming to you and making them sort of vulnerable, and then you don't really know what the hell you're doing. You're just hurting them. You might be book smart, but you didn't go through the work. You didn't live the truth. And it's very, very different when you find legitimate teachers and legitimate psychologists and legitimate whatever, aka the industry is, um, versus the people who've just read a lot of stuff, learned a lot of things, and you know,
Or not.
or not. Yeah,
Or not.
exactly,
They're just there for the paycheck, which is,
exactly.
and
Uh,
you know, it's like, and on the flip side of things, to sort of criticize myself, it's like, well, that project of getting to some complete awareness is like never ending. It's
of
like
course,
the more you know, the more you realize, wow, you really don't know anything. And I read every day and I know much more than I did, say, last year, or I know more today than I did yesterday. But increasingly, I know that I don't know anything. And so it's like, well, like it just sort of flips back and forth, because like in some way it's like, well, you sort of have to dive in anyhow and just start. And so maybe maybe sometime soon I'll start teaching, because I think what you do, it's a noble calling, and you're contributing value to the world in a positive way, and so it's a good thing.
for anyone out there who's listening to this and you're trying to find what is your mission or your message or whatever, um, I'd encourage you on one idea, and this is something Dorian brought up before with the uh, Carl Jung. If you're trying to find the message or trying to find the purpose or trying to find the function or the ideal, um, you'll never find it. Period. Because Carl Jung says the idea finds you. And what's the reason why I was asking you, Dorian, about the 12 to 15 years old is because ultimately you'll come to a place where you're looking in a mirror and you'll realize, oh, it's been there for 30 years. Like, it's not something that, 50 years on the earth, it's already there. It's already in you. And it's nothing outside of you. And ultimately, I was in a conversation yesterday with a guy out of Ireland, and we were talking about how art ultimately is a self-portrait, you know. And I made a statement where the artist, when you really start producing incredible art, um, it's when you finally come to a place when you accept yourself and you actually love it. You love that version of yourself. And we live in a world or any idea. And he actually made this comment about, oh, well, without being narcissistic, it's like you throw in that disclaimer because you're uncomfortable with the idea of loving yourself.
Hmm.
I'm 41. I didn't start loving myself until I went to Portugal. And at the end of that experience, I was like, if I stepped outside of myself and I saw how I handled the crises and all the stuff that was going on around me, I would have thought, wow, that's a really impressive, incredible human being. And then I realized, well, that was me, right? And it's not it's like our teachers, like I was saying before about like my biology teacher, Myron. It's very hard for people to be around confident people because they mistaken it as arrogance. But if you listen carefully, an arrogant person says, I'm so great, so therefore give me this, right? Where a
Mm-hmm.
confident person says, I'm so great, so let me be of assistance and useful to you. Like, let me help. Let me be of
Yeah.
service.
Yeah.
And it's such a small shift, but you've got to be sensitive to the flow of energy. It's like, I'm so great, let me be generous, versus I'm so great, let me tax you, right? So,
Uh-huh.
uh, and
Or like, well, I might have some experience here. I might have some knowledge that may be of help to you. Um, and let's start a dialogue and see if it is.
that's a nice nurturing strategy. But at the end of the day, it's bullshit because you either know you have it or you don't, and you know you can help the person or not, right? And it's just how bold are you willing to be?
Well, so here's my counter in a sense. I
Hmm.
actually, I think that I'm not entirely confident that what I have is what will help somebody else. So I'll give you a really good example, at
Okay.
least a good example for me. Um, I would have been a whole lot more confident about that that I might have the answers to help somebody else out until I met my girlfriend, and I think that those that are closest to us really can teach us a lot.
Hmm.
So she draws very, very differently than I do, and she studied at FIT and studied fashion and studied illustration drawing and has a whole different trajectory of her relationship to art than I do, and and when we met, it's like I learned so much from her that I didn't know. So like a lot of our circles of interest kind of overlap, and then there are things that neither of us have been exposed to um, from the other side, and
Hmm.
so I find that like I don't have the answers for her, and but what I have is more of a conversation that I can start to engage. And a lot of times it's of no help to her whatsoever. And she'll often come out and say, that's like, that's not exactly what I'm looking for. And vice versa.
Hmm.
She'll get excited about something and she'll offer advice and I'll think, oh golly, you're just coming from such a different perspective that that even very basic things of what she finds beautiful, neither of us can agree. Like not all the time, but often, and that's opened my world to the actuality that like as individuals we're all really really different,
Yep.
and trying to get in touch with that sort of sense of life and create an atmosphere for someone else to flourish is probably more in alignment with what I'm trying to do than give somebody the answers. I sort of just have a conversation and say, well, this is what I learned. This is what I think works for me. And the last thing you want to do is copy me. But,
Hmm.
you know, let's just start trying to understand something. And probably the best thing that we can do that I've found is to work from life, to make a movement away from the machine,
Mm-hmm.
but to try and look for answers while working directly from life.
Then, dude, like that's it. You know, when I was saying the bullshit, I meant the bullshit in
Yeah.
all of the words of maybe, hopefully,
Uh-huh.
that's the bullshit. The truth
Yeah.
is your approach, which is stoic and very Greek and spot on and actually highly effective, is through questions and conversation. And then you lead the person through um, a form of thinking that allows them to discover the answers for themselves, which is, and it's relevant to them. So, um, I agree with you. It's not about giving the person the answers because it's not their answer. They have to discover it for themselves. But being a guide and helping facilitate that dialogue, that internal dialogue, by being an external, tangible voice of it, um, is brilliant. And I think your approach to it is extremely healthy, and not and in separating your ego, because that's a big issue, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I have to be the one who has the glory for telling her that this is what she did, and it's like, if you care about the person, then it's a privilege and an honor to help lead or guide or even just spark that conversation, right?
Yeah. 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 Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
that's, yeah, man. When you were saying that also, um, I was gonna say, well, the other part is that she's just a woman and she doesn't want you to tell her how to fix or solve anything. She just wants you to hear her, right? So, uh, and it kind of made me think about a pencil and a piece of paper, which I've never thought about life this way before. But the pencil is crying out for something to make marks on it, and the paper is crying out, make marks on me, and the pencil is crying out, I want something I can mark. And together, it's neither. Once the paper is marked, someone could say the paper is ruined because it's no longer the paper alone, right?
Uh-huh.
And so there's an additive nature. You're adding something to that paper. But for the pencil, there's a sacrifice as well. I mean, the paper sacrifices its identity, its soloness, right? Because now it's bound to something. The pencil sacrifices because now it's giving up part of itself, right? Slowly, the
Yeah.
paper dies. I mean,
Yeah.
the pencil dies, and it really never dies. It just transfers. It
Sure.
leaves the lead leaves its wooden coffin, right? Its holder, and now is free of and bound to something else. And in that, there's this third thing that's quote unquote created, and uh,
Oh, yeah.
it's the we, it's the us, it's neither the
Yeah.
paper or the
That's the
pencil,
relationship,
and
right?
that's the
That's
relationship.
yeah, yeah. It's the process of all relationships like that. We cross pollinate our ideas.
Yep.
How
And
wonderful.
yeah, when you were studying with Myron, you learned about the rectangles and stuff, and I do this video, which is it's the same exact concept, and I say if there's one single point on a piece of paper, it has the right, the privilege, and the authority to extend itself in any direction it wants, right? But if you take that point and you take another point and you declare that these 2 points are in relationship to each other, well, then there's a line that's drawn to them. And now they're bound. They don't have the right anymore to go in any direction. And when you have those 2 points and you put an notional space around those 2 points, now you have a rectangle with a diagonal along the center. And that rectangle has 2 other points, and then you draw those lines, and now you have, let's say, a sinister diagonal that goes across, creating a point in the middle, right? And each point has the authority to go vertical or horizontal. When you do that, now you're beginning to divide this thing up. And within the relationship of those 2 points, like if you have a point and the relationship is up higher, and closer, it creates a rectangle that's very different than one that's lower and further away, which is this long horizontal rectangle. So just by shifting the point, it changes the relationship, but then also changes the entire gamut and armature of the world that those 2 points create. It's fascinating. And with inside of there are certain, it gives you a set of lines, we call them 8 lines, a gamut, that then you can compose your entire composition out so that it harmonizes, resonates, and is one with ultimately the relationship that started with 2 points. And it doesn't matter if you go abstract or photorealism, but if you compose and design it and you order your image, it'll all come back to the relationship that started between these 2 points. And it's a very interesting philosophy, but when you see it from that point, it's like, holy moly, like literally everything can come from this 2 relationships of 2 cells, 2 points, you create literally this body of art,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
So, quick question. I'm going to ask you before I ask you how people can connect with you. What do you love to eat, man?
It's predominantly, I would say it's predominantly vegetables. Well, it's mostly like a vegan type of diet. But I'll have a little bit of fish. It's usually organic and wild caught and that kind of thing.
Do you catch your own fish?
Excuse me?
Do you catch your own fish?
No, I don't. I haven't gone fishing. It's mostly sardines or salmon, but it's mostly vegetables. Mostly, we just cook different vegetable dishes. So
what's one of your favorite vegetables that you just love to snack on if you could?
Oh, a favorite vegetable,
or favorite with maybe top 3.
Well, I'll tell you, I mix. I get criticized for this because it's not like a taste thing for me as much as it is a nutrient type of thing that will fulfill that has the highest percentage of nutrients in it that will sustain my life and the best brain power and health and that kind of thing. So with that in mind, I kind of mix a whole lot of things together in the morning to start my day, and it's not like cereal or just oatmeal.
Do you make a smoothie?
Yeah.
A green smoothie?
So I have like broccoli and spinach and kale and some fruit in there, berries and bananas and apples and sometimes some sweet potato and avocado. And
oh yeah,
so there's a lot of stuff that goes in there, and there's a lot more, and it kind of like gets switched up, and nuts go in there as well.
Nice.
So it's really like specifically tailored. There's ginger and garlic and.
Yeah, I take the ginger garlic every day, and cayenne pepper.
Yeah, I mean these things, like, it's intentional.
Yeah.
For health, and for the clarity of mind, and so it's not, and it's to try and get as many nutrients as I can from food as opposed to like vitamins. So
indeed.
Yeah.
Do you freeze your bananas?
I don't. We consume so much of them, the two of us, that there's no chance to freeze them.
Okay.
Go right through them.
Because when I make my smoothies, I used to put the ice in there, right? And I found that what I do is I buy a whole bunch of bananas.
Yeah.
I actually stopped using bananas, but because I just wanted to go green, like with the green, so I would use the avocados. But but when I used to do the bananas, I would buy a whole bunch of them, and I break each banana into 3 pieces, just boom, 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 boom. And it was kind of nice because in one setting, you just get rid of all those peels and throw them out. and then you had no garbage, right? So then, and then I would put them in a big dish, put them in a freezer. And what I found is if I took 2 or 3 of them, basically a banana, and threw it frozen in there, I would not have to put any ice. And because they were frozen and they would cool down the drink, but they would add like a smoothiness to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where the ice oftentimes becomes it's a smoothie, but it almost becomes like a slushy feel versus like a milkshake feel, like kind of experience.
Yeah.
And so it just added this nice creamy texture to it, which I enjoy. Um, and then when I used to make sweet potatoes, I'd cook them for about 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 40 minutes. And around that 2.5 hour mark, it would break the sweet potato when you break it, and it would just fill the house with the sweetness. So it's just incredible. And then when I had that, I would then roll them. I would smash it up and roll them into little balls, and I would freeze them. So I would then take a little frozen sweet potato ball and throw it in my smoothie, and oh my gosh, it was incredible.
Sweet potatoes are delicious.
Yeah. Oh my
Sweet
goodness.
potatoes are delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like them because I I have I have to be very careful with my blood sugar, diabetes running in the family and things like that. But what I found was at one time, if I had in the morning just a cup of like say hot chocolate, but like really high end hot chocolate, um, and a sweet potato, I would have absolutely no sugar cravings throughout the day. And I wouldn't, and for the longest time, I used to always fall asleep like in the middle of the daytime. I just get like
Mm-hmm.
super tired.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have a sweet potato in the morning, like that doesn't exist anymore. Like, because it
Oh,
just is this nice slow burning carb right throughout the day, and it tastes great, and it's fun, Um, so yeah, I like sweet potatoes a
yeah, I
lot.
would think. I mean, and another benefit for you is it's got a low glycemic index. So,
Yeah,
good things.
so that's cool, man. Uh, just quick question. If you were out with a whole bunch of people and they brought out, a small cow on a table and a small pig and all these animals, and they were eating it, would you throw up, or are you okay with other people eating meat?
I'm totally okay with other people eating meat, and people do what they're going to do. And I'm just, like I said earlier, I'm just trying to fix myself.
Cool.
I mean, these are my ethical decisions. They seem to be, from my research, like the most sustainable way to move through life. But,
Yep.
but hey, people do what they do, and uh, you know, I let other people fix themselves and handle their own lives.
Yeah, and the reason why I was asking was when the illustration con, the IX con comes to Reading. I guess you said August.
Yeah.
Um, I one of my dreams, and it's the reason why I started the podcast, was having artists together at a long table, sharing a meal, having great conversations.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so I'm having this fantasy right now of somehow figuring out how to actually make that physical, not just in a podcast, digital, but actually physical. And I'm going to be doing a podcast with Chris, and he suggests I do one with you. And he gave me a list of a whole bunch of other guys, but he was the one who told me about the IX con over there. But if we're all going to be in the same city, then I'd love to maybe afterwards, have dinner or do something,
Oh,
together.
sure. I know a lot of people there that we can have dinner with, and I
Great.
can connect you with the organizer, and he'll turn you on to a lot of people. But there are more people, more artists in that one particular convention that you could fit around a table. A lot of times they'll all go out to like a restaurant, so you
Yeah,
can hop from table to table. It's a lot of fun.
that's right. That's awesome. That's why
Yeah.
we need a long table. Um, there. Yeah, if you could hook me up with the organizer, because I'm sure they already have everything there. But um, did you happen to see the lecture I did in Portugal on the link between story and design?
No, I saw your recent Joseph Campbell. Sorry, Joseph
Yeah, the camp one.
DeCamp. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That was good. I liked it. But I didn't see the other. So
Okay, I do like a lecture. I've done it. I did it actually at the studio of Continanti. How you say it?
in Caminati.
In Conti, yes, there. Um, in Philly, and I did it down in Atlanta in Portugal. Actually, I did it in Reading. um, and it would be a great uh, lecture talk to do at the Goggle Works down there, especially for a group of people who are illustrators and fantasy artists. It would be very fascinating.
Sure. Well, I'll
Um,
hook you up.
yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. Um, well, Dorian, we're in the local area, man. We got to get together sometime. And I'm a huge fan of your work, man. What you're doing is just incredible. It's interesting. I'll say, um, I like the women in your drawings, um, and I love that they feel very contemporary, right? But there's something about the way you draw them that it's like I see them and I know they're women, but the way in which you draw their contours and the space in which they take up, they become something, even they become works of art in themselves, just in the beautiful silhouettes that they make. And it was interesting. There was one where the one girl was she was like wearing red panties or something, and she was like, I don't know, picking up shoes or something, but like just the form in which she made, there was like no gutters in there. There was just the shape was just this beautiful little shape, um, in the midst of, I think it was a big closet or something that she was in.
Oh yeah.
And then I loved that, and I don't know if you studied the Fletcher color system with Myron or not.
No.
Okay, that's something you probably want to look into. But using, I think it was like that orangey red color, became like this beautiful soloist in this orchestra of these beautiful blues and purples, and it was just a beautiful orchestration of values, of color, shapes, and I was like, "Ooh, this is going to be incredible," And so I looked through your paintings, and then when I went to your drawings, I was like, "Whoa!" I felt like I was in front of a rock star. Oh my gosh!
Oh,
I'm a
thanks.
Dorian
Thanks.
groupie.
Thanks so much.
It was.
Thanks. Yeah, yeah. Like the femininity, like respect for femininity
Mm-hmm.
um, is a large part of what I'm trying to explore, like with my artwork, and and without doubt, right? Like, so
Yeah.
there's being a male, there's a mystery and an appreciation for like the feminine and the mother and that kind of thing, um, and fashion and everything that
Mm-hmm.
is a part of that, that's just a mystery to me, right? Because that's not what I am. But it's like it's so intensely alluring, biologically, that I just
And psychologically too.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And every word you just used is exactly what I was feeling in your work. When you first started, the respect of women, like that's the crazy thing. Some of the women are nudes. Most of them seem to be, half dressed, panties, whatever. But there is nothing disrespectful about it. Like, there's no strange connotation in that. And like the, the environment, the mood, it's all respectful. It's actually, you feel like you're trying to understand this this unicorn, right? And that's part of the magic and the mystery, like, that I'm feeling when I'm looking at your work. I'm like, yeah, it's real. I mean, I see her. I mean, everything is there, is observed properly, but there's something almost mystical or magical, or like it's right on the cusp of like this fantasy. But nothing sexual or anything like that. Not that that's bad, but but it's not that. It's. But when you said the word respect, it's like it's a very much like honoring a modern woman in a modern time, but with almost like a chivalry in a sense.
Oh,
It,
thank
it
you so much. Yeah,
yeah, it's
that's
nice.
those are all sentiments that I'm trying to impose on. I mean, it's just the filter through which I see the world. So
Yeah,
so it's not an artificial thing, and at the same time, like as a male, like just like I said, biologically, they're the female is so like intensely alluring and attractive, and um, so just trying to balance all of that. And
yeah.
Carl Jung's aspect of the anima, um, and trying to.
I'm sorry, I always have to laugh at that. My brother always talks about the anima, and I'm like, what? You got to poop? What? I was like in my mind, like, anima? What?
Oh, anima. That's funny. The anima. Uh-huh.
Anima. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. Um,
Yeah, that's um. Yeah, it's funny. Donna said you got to talk to Dorian. He's like you. He's like this. He's a romantic, right?
uh-huh.
And when I was younger, I used to hate that because I always equated like being a romantic as being like some type of sleazy sexual predator kind of guy, like.
Oh, interesting. Uh-huh.
And I remember being in high school saying to my art teacher, "I'm a realist," and she laughed at me. She's like, "You're not a realist, right?" I'm like, "What?" And it took me years before I understood what she meant. And I used to look at a Rockwell and say he's a realist, right? Because he could draw real, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like he was not a realist. His whole existence was built on this fantasy, this romantic idea of what. And he would say, "I don't draw life as it is, aka realism. I draw it as it ought to be."
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to push through. And um, I had one of my first students who knew Myron, studied with Myron, knew his stuff. She said, it's weird. She's like, he was like the Freud and you're like the Carl Jung. And I didn't get that for a while. And what I realized was like Myron taught these fundamentals, and that was what he was doing. He was teaching the how to do this and what to do. But you never really got, unless you were in private study with him and you knew how to ask the right questions, um, you never got the why things existed, why they, or who. Like you never got that aspect. You never got the story part of it. And I think being an illustrator, having that affinity for illustration, that was foundational. Where the fine artist is, may struggle with that a little bit, but the idea of telling a story, communicating an idea, and then using your visuals to convey that, not necessarily having to do it in a narrative format. So, like Cezanne, was a great storyteller, I believe, but his approach was we're painting sensations, right? Like his story was the feeling that he wanted you to feel, and wasn't necessarily Jack and Jill going up the hill, but it was the sensation of really traveling up a hill that was important. And uh, so I love the fact that you talk about Carl Jung and that you're and Joseph Campbell
Campbell.
Campbell,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's such a big part of your philosophy, um, and then the sensitivity of your soul, the romantic nature of your heart. and then you're tackling these subjects like females and things like that. It's just a great combination. And then on the other side, you actually remind me of Myron. I used to hang out at Myron's house when he was trying to learn how to use his computer. He paid me to come over and teach him the computer, and and that's where we actually built our intimate friendship. But in his kitchen, every morning he'd get up and he'd have his coffee, and he had this little tiny podium thing on his table with an encyclopedia. And every morning for, I don't know, 60 years or whatever, he would read the encyclopedia.
How great.
Yeah. And like, it was in his 70s when I really got to befriend him. And he'd just do that, he just read encyclopedias. It was cool.
That's interesting. So like random bits of knowledge, sprinkled throughout.
Yeah, it was like his breakfast was reading. And that's kind of like you have your smoothie in the morning, whatever, and like you said, you wake up and you read. You put so there's a beautiful nature of you're investing in yourself, in your mind. You've actually, and in what you're studying, things are descending into your spirit, into your soul, and then you're also then adding to that, using that knowledge to apply to your physiology, right? So this mind, body, and soul harmony between the two, and being very deliberate and intentional about that, I think is quite remarkable and honorable, and
Well, thank you. Yeah, and then having all of those actions that are deliberate,
yes,
like pulled from from philosophy, and then trying to make some visual representation of that, which is the art, like the poetry from the idea. Not easy. It's really not easy. It's so
it's
hard.
not. But that's why it's awesome. It's interesting. One of my students, his name is Bill. He was actually, I think, maybe my first student who paid me, right? And he was like this old guy who was a house painter his whole life. And then he decided when he retired that he was wanting to paint the paintings that go on walls, not just paint the walls. And his father was a house painter. And so that's what he did. But it was funny because he was this little black man, right? And so he would do these houses up in New York, and he'd show up and he'd be this little black guy. And back in those days, it was like, but he was so well read, and and he knew things. Oh, is that a Ming Dynasty vase from the Ming Dynasty year? And they were like, what? And then they would get into these conversations. So he would use his intelligence and things to break the wall of these stereotypes and stuff. And he built these great relationships with these people. And so he was going to have his first show, and I helped him compose these images that went up. But he's very, very metaphysical, esoteric thinker as well. And he spent years in Indonesia with some group of people about meditation and things like that. So he's kind of like my little Yoda right now in my life. And he says, as artists, we're shamans. He calls us, and so we embrace this philosophy at the academy that we're shamans. And I like, if I was going to say you're a shaman, because I look at you as one, which is that psychologist, doctor, artist, priest, philosopher of the tribe, right? All those types of things wrapped into this one, what's the word? Anima? This one character, right?
Okay.
And we'll call that the shaman. And his function in this tribe is to help people connect to their past, to have optimism of the future. You want a baby? Well, here, go kill something, bring me some meat. In your case, go gather a lot of vegetables and bring me them. And in exchange for your time, I'm going to go ahead and craft this thing that's going to inspire and trigger faith and optimism and hope and things like that, right? Um, and I like the fact that your tribe, if you were the shaman of a tribe, it would be a health and fitness conscious tribe, and that's just a very interesting perspective for artists to ask yourself, what if you were the shaman? What would your tribe be? And then
That's
go make
interesting.
art for those people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, I'm going to write that one down and focus on that. That was good. Um, Dorian, you're freaking awesome, and I thank you for your time.
Thank
You
you.
may officially be the longest podcast that I've done so far,
All right.
but it was totally awesome, and I know anyone who's listening to this is smiling. So keep your
Oh,
smile.
good. Oh, thank you. If anybody's made it this far, my goodness, thank you so much.
Sorry, I hit the mute button. How can they connect with you?
That's funny. Perfect timing, right?
Right.
Yeah, mute. Great. All right. Golly, my website's got my email on there. And, I'm on all the social media platforms.
What's your website?
I have two websites. One is a portrait website, and the other one's a fine art website. I think the one that's more heavily trafficked these days is my fine art website, which is DorianVallejo.com.
Vallejo.
Yeah.
What is that?
My father is from Lima, Peru.
Really?
Yeah,
Peruvian.
Yeah.
Interesting. I can't say his last name. His name's Alex. He does the nudes on the skateboards. I'm going to send you his name, but
Okay.
actually I know two Alexes that are really great artists, and they're both from Peru. So I'm going to connect you with those guys. It might be something of interest for you. They're really cool guys.
Yeah, but my mother's from the other side though. She's from Germany. So.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah. So there's a
that must have been an interesting house to live in.
Yeah. Of course, you never know, because like you just grow up with what you grow up of, and that's the norm for what you have. And I don't know. It was interesting to me, I guess. Although I spent a good deal. They were both artists, and that's how they met each other. And my father came to this country specifically with the notion to pursue his artistic career and make something happen here, and which he did very well. And
nice.
So I think that household and having art, being surrounded by art at an early age, yeah, for sure, that was very, very interesting.
So if your dad's philosophy was, hey, kind of just experience it, low structure, and your mom is an artist out of Germany, was she similar in that philosophy, or was she very, very different in that philosophy?
No, she was also, so her father was a sociology professor, but an extremely important person, like in regard to World War II and the history and prosecution of Hitler and the war crimes and the Nuremberg trials. And
wow,
it's like such an important professor. And to the end of his days, people visited him and came to ask him questions and interview him. And so I think she kind of rebelled against that. And although she's highly educated, she didn't impose any of that, like on me, any of that structure. So both of them like really never really imposed any kind of structure, which is very, very funny, because that's the thing that appeals to me very much is structure. They just were really hands off very much, didn't even look over homework or ask me what I was learning. They just
And,
put food on the table.
and yet you came out as someone who seems to love studying, and there, and then want the structure. Maybe there was a method to their madness. Because maybe
Maybe, and sometimes, I don't know. I really just don't know. I just, sometimes I think it's random luck. I mean, that my mother was the type to get a book
Mhm.
and leave it on the table, and I only learned this much later in life, but so like after I was out of the house, so I'm like I missed out on so much, but never even say, hey, there's a book on table, you might like to look at it or read it. She just leave it there, and if you picked it up on your own and you engaged it, then that was your business. And if you wanted to have a conversation about it, that was your business. But other than that, the book would be there for a little bit and then it'd be gone. So there's all this stuff that I'm sure I missed out on. But with that in mind, like as a teenager, she got books on tape for me, and because I started painting and thought, well, she started reading to me out loud things that were that would stimulate that kind of internal dialogue, and stimulate ideas, but she wasn't provoking conversation. She would just like plant the seeds, and that would be it. If I started talking about them, then I did, and if I didn't, she wouldn't push it. She would take me to some kind of lectures, and or take me to a play. But if I didn't talk about it, she didn't bring it up. And like now, it's like part of probably the reason I push as hard as I do to teach myself is because I feel like, oh my God, I have to make up for so much lost time. And there's a whole world of things that I wish that like I had engaged in dialogue about, and I'm just disappointed in myself, not her or my father, just myself for not like being more aware. In any case, that early introduction to literature and lectures stimulated my love for books on tape, and by accident I came across. I was at in the library one day, in my early 30s, and was just asking the librarian for something to read and listen to, and she said, you might enjoy this book. And it was The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And that changed my whole life. That did it. Right.
That's awesome.
That instantly changed everything.
Wow. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. That just opened. I mean, there were early seeds, but that was like an explosion going off.
I love that, man. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to have, I'm going to say ciao, and we'll continue this conversation another time. I want to hear your ideas about the Fountainhead.
I will write you. I'll write to Patrick and hook the two of you guys up, and then we'll get together.
Cool. Excellent, man.
If nothing else, we'll see each other at LuxCon.
Yep.
Okay.
In just 30 days, the Core 80 experience teaches you to decode the intentional design underneath great masterpieces. Through video lessons, assignments, and feedback, you learn to recognize the underlying structures like thrust maps, echoes, and gamuts that give master compositions substance and gravitas. Knowing how master artists and illustrators compose their artwork unlocks your ability to give your artwork more meaning and energy. Enroll today and get a 7-day no-hassle money-back guarantee at core80.com.